Um, Obviously, I'm not Mr. Robinson. I'm Mr. Rollins, your student teacher. I'll be just going over a few things today. Just to remind you, we do have some stuff on Google Classroom if you have access to that. All the stuff that I go over today, and I'll explain the purpose of this video. But if you have any questions about any assignments at all on Google Classroom, you can post that. I'm a resource on there that you can contact. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask that. You've been dealing with some of the stuff leading up to the Civil War. This is not introducing the Civil War yet. This is kind of before that. So today, and I'm sharing my screen with you, this video will be on Google Classroom, so you can go back to it. And we're going to be going over today, how did slavery shape my state? So this is material that you should have done in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade leading up, and then maybe some in middle school so far, but you should have a pretty good working knowledge of this. And today we're just going to look at the Commonwealth of Kentucky. How did slavery shape my state? There's an assignment to go along with this. Again, all this will be in Google Classroom. I'll show you how to access that. So our leading question, how did slavery shape my state? Today we're just going to look at one of these supporting questions. You guys are familiar with this, the way that we have a compelling and then supporting question. So our compelling question is, how did slavery shape my state? Today's supporting question, we're just going to look at this one right here. Where did slave populations grow? So in Kentucky specifically, where, how, when did slave populations grow? For the first part, we're just going to be focusing on this. This is what this video is just going to be focusing on. We're going to have a graphic organizer that explains where slavery grew in consideration of geographic features. So we know in Kentucky we have rivers, border states, some mountains, some forests. So all those will come and we'll show through some sources, some primary sources. We have 3 of these here. I'll pull them up on this video and also link them so that you can pull them up and use for the formative performance task. So what today we're going to be looking at is we're going to lead you through, this is just the first part in a series of videos that I'll be posting. Before we actually get into the Civil War, remember this is leading up to the Civil War, and we've talked about how slavery was a key point in the Civil War, how it led to the Civil War. So we're going to see how the influence on slavery and individual states, particularly Kentucky, and how the spread of slavery led to the Civil War stance and how Kentucky felt during the Civil War. So our first supporting question, where did slave populations grow? We're going to unwrap the geographic factors, so mountains, streams, rivers, how they led to this growth of slavery in particular areas over other areas, and how they differed from the northern to the southern states. And we'll see how they divided up. We know that in the Civil War, there's north and south. This is kind of helping to see, well, where was that lineup? So the formative performance task, which we're familiar with, has a graphic organizer. I'll pull that up. We're not going to look at it right now. It'll be later on in the video. But again, all this will be leaked in Google Classroom. So we have an interactive map from a historian. First, I want to look at this video, though. And this is kind of talking about slavery's role and how it started. It just gives a real good overview, and it kind of brings up some stuff in case you forgot about Kentucky. So we'll watch this video together. Hopefully it's sharing on my screen.
History is a great teacher.
But a teacher needs a willing student.
Slavery was not an incidental phenomenon.
Our lesson in the selling of men, women, and children will begin right here at home.
Louisville and Kentucky's role in slavery is pretty distinctive.
Kentucky, generally classified as the Upper South or a border state, is often categorized as a milder form of slavery, although Kentucky slaves still suffered grueling work schedules, especially on hemp and tobacco farms, separation from family, threat of death or severe punishment, and mental, physical, and spiritual abuse. They were property, but it wasn't the Deep South.
Louisville, given its central location on the river, became a site where people were being sold down the river to the cotton plantations.
So don't forget about that. Think about Kentucky's location. We have the Ohio River that runs almost all the way on the northern side of Kentucky, all the way to West Virginia, and then up through Pennsylvania, all the way over there. So keep in mind some geographic features. They just talked about the Ohio River. That's about what we're going to be talking today, how these geographic features affected slavery.
sugar plantations.
Chances are they would never come back again. They would never, if they were separated from their family, they'd never see their family again.
Kentucky did not lose an economical beat when controversial laws limited and finally banned the importation of slaves. Its intrastate or internal slave trade was full steam ahead, right down the Ohio and all the way to the bank. Its perfect location allowed for a larger number of exported slaves than most states. Hence, the later euphemism for any sort of betrayal, sold downriver. Yet,
The Ohio River was the River Jordan.
slaves could get to the promised land.
So think about why they called it the River Jordan. Mr. Robinson would probably be able to elaborate more on this since he's a pastor, but think about what the River Jordan meant to the people of ancient Egypt and the Israelites. When they went to the River Jordan, that was symbolized freedom. Think about Ohio's role. We kind of talked about how Ohio and Kentucky were split. Kentucky was a border state. That did not mean that they didn't have slaves, and it didn't mean that it was in the deep south either. They were kind of in between.
If they could successfully cross the Ohio River to the free states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, they could see freedom. But could they get to it? And even then, would they be safe?
The Underground Railroad, the flight across the Ohio River to northern localities, and the struggles that creates.
That was also an important part of the slave trade because slave catching was a lucrative business as well.
Even freedom had its evils.
You also have to be afraid every moment of every day that you would be kidnapped and sold into slavery.
A small black and gold marker at the corner of 2nd and Main Streets in downtown Louisville, just feet from the Yum Center, reminds us of the story of people shackled together in pens when not on display to buyers.
It's the center of Louisville then and now, right?
So that video did a really good job talking. It highlighted Louisville for the most part, and its location, how it was central really in the United States at that time in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and its role. So we're going to look at the spread, and keep in mind when we look at these maps, Louisville's role in that. So the first primary source that we're going to look at is a spread of U.S. slavery, 1790 to 1860, which was, of course, leading up to the Civil War. 1860s is where the Civil War comes in. We'll talk about that later. But here's our spread. So we have a lot of states through here. And I'm going to show you how to manipulate this map so we can work on the formative performance task. But looking at this primary source, let's note out some things. So you can obviously pinch the screen to go in, zoom in. You can also take this right down here in the bottom corner. It has 1790 to 1860, and you could show the a lot of things with this. We'll walk through that. So let's look at 1790. Of course, Kentucky, the Commonwealth, was established 1792, late 1700s. So 1790, it still shows it. But, of course, we're part of Virginia still. So see, all of this is still Virginia. And we can see Nelson County, Old Virginia, Lincoln, Virginia. Kentucky is still part of Virginia Greenbrier, which is, of course, a county in West Virginia now. Ohio is outlined right here. It's the territory outline. Ohio wasn't a state until 1803, the Northwest Ordinance. So you could see the outline still, but now we just have one big Virginia. Virginia was the biggest state with the biggest population this time. Let's look and see where most of the slaves are. And it's kind of, I'll zoom in a little bit. It's kind of evident to see where they're at. They're right here on the coast. We see the dark red down here, 33,300 to 100,000 slaves. Let's just go to this dark red county. Charleston, South Carolina, slaves, 50,000 slaves. There's only 950 free. It also has the total population. So you can hover over each little county, territory, and see the population. It actually has slaves per a quarter mile, 12.81 slaves. The free African Americans per quarter mile, total free persons, and then all persons. So this primary source does a really good job in this interactive website does a really good job, and it'll help you on that formative performance task. I'll actually go to that so we can see. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have this pulled up right beside. I have to go back. Wouldn't be a bad idea to have this pulled up right beside when you're dealing with these sources. And this will be just posted by itself. So let's look at 1790. And we're actually going to corroborate all three sources that we're going to use today to answer this. So what states have the most slaves? And we have 1790 to 1860. Where are most slaves in those states? You can look and see just a general location. Don't just say left or right. Give me a to the ocean, to this landmark, to this geographic feature. And then this next one, which geographic features are they near? Mountains, rivers, the ocean coast. And we'll go back and look. These first two, where did slave populations grow? We can't see where it decreased from the previous year because it just started with 1790, right? So we'll go back here and analyze it some more. And you notice that as we get inland, we don't have as many. We only have 828 here in Montgomery, Virginia. Mason, Virginia, we only have 229. Notice how most of the slaves are right here on the coast. Because when they would transport them in, we don't have a whole globe here. We just have part of the United States. But they would be coming in from this right side, from the ocean, from the slave trade, Atlantic slave trade. So this is where most of these slaves would come in at. Let's go ahead and fast forward. That's 1790. We know 1792 is when Kentucky was formed as a state. So Kentucky is now in it. We have a lot of counties that we know today. Madison County, Berea, had 1,700 slaves. Garrett County, Hardin County, Washington County. See if we can find, if not that many counties are shown. But again, you can zoom in. And we have, of course, some more states being formed down here. As we progress in time, Ohio is still up here. It's the Northwest Territory, just about to be formed. We're at 1,800 right now. And what do we notice? Let's go back from 1790. So we have 1790. See what you notice between there. Looks like more slaves are starting to go a little bit more inland, right? After they get settled on the coast, now we're going to see this spread inward. Let's jump to 1820. We have more states, especially in Kentucky. Look at the growth in Kentucky. Let's go from 1790 to 1820. We're spreading way out west, even in Louisiana, a state that wasn't even there yet in 1800. Now we're seeing the slaves spread inward towards the middle of the country. Let's keep going, 1840. This is where we're starting to see a distinction between the North and the South. Really 1830 and maybe even 1820, we're starting to see a very good distinction, more in 1830. But again, you can play with this and mess and see how the population's changed. We're getting to see a distinction between the North and the South. So we have West Virginia, which is still part of Virginia at that time, and Pennsylvania having close to no slaves. But this is where we start to form the Deep South. A lot of slaves are in the Deep South. Mississippi, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky is still a border state. Let's see if we can find Louisville. Be all the way up Jefferson County. Almost 7,000 slaves, right? So we have the total free population, 17,000. But 30% of those people were slaves. A huge, huge percentage of the population were slaves. And we're just going to be looking at Kentucky mainly today. But again, you can see here in Alabama, the Deep South, a lot of slaves. Let's just fast forward to 1860. It's pretty blatant to see how the difference in ideologies led to the Civil War. And let's go back to our supporting question or compelling question. How does slavery shape my state? Of course, we're looking at Kentucky. Supporting question, where did slave populations grow? Let's go back to our graphic organizer. Our formative performance task. and what states had the most slaves. So this is where we're going to bring in another primary source. So we've looked at that one source. You can use it to help answer some of those questions. But now we're going to be looking at an 1860 census population. So we just have Kentucky right here and West Virginia. I'll zoom this in so we can see it. This is 1860, the census. So of course, this year we have a census going on. Notice how the darker colors, the more slaves there are. The lighter, not so many slaves. We can see a lot of, there's Rowan right here, where we're at currently. 1860, most of Kentucky's counties have been formed. So we see right here in the middle, Bourbon, Scott, Fayette, Clark County, a lot of slave populations. Towards the center of the state, Henderson over here. Let's see if we can find, here's Louisville right here. And of course this border, we have the Ohio River running all the way up it. So we see this population of slaves. And then as we go deeper south, the slave population is unprecedented compared to more northern. Even in the South, the northern states did not have as many slaves as the deep South. So we see Georgia having a lot, Alabama having a lot, South Carolina, North Carolina having a lot of slaves. So use that when you're filling out your formative performance task for this first supporting question. So that was our second featured source. Our last source, so we have three sources. This source consists of two tables related to slave and slave-owning populations. The first table displays the population breakdown. So we have white, freed, slave, and non-slave for the original 13 colonies, 1790 to 1860. This is the source that is really going to help you with this formative performance task, really putting everything together into a graphic organizer. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we have a little bit of commentary up here. This is what's going to help you a lot, and I'll actually pull it up beside it so we can, and I'll walk through part of the formative performance task with you. So let's look at 1790. Which states have the most slaves? This source is where you'll find your exact numbers so we can compare our exact numbers. So we have the 13 colonies on the right side. Table 1, we have the population of the original 13 colonies, selected years by type. So we have Connecticut, all 13 colonies. Down here, you notice Kentucky's not in it because it was not a colony. It was part of Virginia. So we'll look at Virginia to see where Kentucky's numbers came in at. So 1750, what's our first? We're looking at 1790. Let's go to 1790, which is this category. So we have our free, non-white, and you can compare it and cross-reference to see Connecticut, our slave numbers for each state, and then how it progresses. Here's table 2. We have maybe 4 tables here. Population of the South by type. We have 1790. We have over 1 million whites, 32,500 free non-whites, which means that they were slaves, but now free. And then look at this number. We have over 600,000 slaves. Nearly 50% of the total white population, that number is equivalent in black slaves. And this one does a really good job, table 3, slaves as a percentage of the total population. So we see Alabama in 1860, 45% of slaves made up the total population. 1750, blacks to the total population, 5%. And South Carolina is this should draw your attention. South Carolina, nearly 61% of the total population were black slaves. Now that number did go down towards 1810, and then it jumped right back up in 1860. So we see that things kind of tailored off in 1790, and then with the invention of course, the cotton gin, and where we have this industrial revolution, which we talked about, you guys did your inventors, where they're inventing all this stuff. And Eli Whitney, especially, we know that he developed the cotton gin. And who did they need to run the cotton gin? think about who they needed. It wouldn't be white, free. It'd be black slaves, right? So this is where we see this population grow after the Industrial Revolution. It's 47%. Here's South Carolina, 1810. Then jumps back up to 57%. This one is very interesting. We have the holdings of Southern slave owners by states in 1860. So Alabama, we had 33,000 slave holders. These were individual white men, of course. 5,000 held one slave, and then it keeps going down. Obviously, the more slaves you have, the richer you are, so that's not going to be as prevalent. So 5,607 held one slave. And here's the total numbers. We had almost 400,000 people in our 13 colonies in 1860 hold slaves. 78,000 held one slave. So we just see really crazy numbers out of this. So let's look at 1790. What states have the most slaves? Remember, you can use any source you want. Let's go to this one. 1790 census. Which states had the most slaves? Well, let's go to the most red. We see Virginia. So Virginia would be a big one that has the most slaves. Somewhere like the Southwest Territory, we don't have to include that yet in 1790 because Tennessee did just not existed yet. Georgia did, not that many, so we won't put that in there. Let's go to some more really red here. North Carolina, that would be another state that we could put. So what states have the most slaves? 1790. I would use, again, you can use any source you want. Definitely not this one for the 1790 because this is just 1860. But we have what states have the most slaves? Virginia, South Carolina. Let's look at another one. Pennsylvania, really not that much. We see a couple of dark spots. Mainly probably in that one, Virginia, North Carolina. Maybe South Carolina also has a lot, so you could put that one in there too. Make sure you don't just put one state because it's asking what states have the most slaves. So South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina on this one. Where are most of the slaves in those states? We kind of hit on this earlier, but look, they're situated against the ocean, right, to the right side of the state. Really directly for this question, write down a county. So where are most states in those slaves? So you should have listed Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Just list the most populous county in that state using this map. So let's go to Virginia. We see some dark red. We see 11,000 slaves in that. And that looks, you can hover over this to see the most. That 11,000 is going to be the most. So we'll put Amelia, Virginia. That's where most of the states are, most of the slaves are in Virginia. Let's go down to North Carolina. Remember, we're looking for the dark red. It's pretty dark red. See 3,000. Zoom over. I see a 6,000. So we have Halifax, which is still a big population. That's part of Virginia now, obviously, Halifax, Virginia. So we have 6,600, nearly 6,700 slaves. So that looks like the most in South Carolina. So just hover over this, find the most populous for whatever state you listed. Find the most populous county for slaves. And we put South Carolina. Definitely Charleston, South Carolina has the most, 50,633. So we can write down Charleston, South Carolina for this box. What geographic features are they near? This one's pretty easy for 1890. They're near the ocean, right? Most of the slaves, we see the dark red, the red, the orange against the ocean. So that one's pretty easy. We can put near the ocean coast. And of course, we don't have the previous year or decreased from the previous year data. Let's do 1810. Again, we can use the same graphic organizer. Let's go to 1810. So what states have the most slaves? Let's look at our dark red. We actually have some more here. Remember, Kentucky is still a state. After 1792, it's formed a state. So we have Kentucky have a lot. Virginia still has a lot. North and South Carolina all still have a lot. We're starting to see Georgia get a lot here. So write maybe 2 or 3 states out of these in the Deep South that have the most. You're obviously not going to write Ohio or Pennsylvania or New York for this. Even the Illinois Territory, don't write any of this. Even the Orleans Territory in Louisiana, part of Louisiana, would have a lot of slaves. So write down 2 or 3. I don't need every single state that has a lot. What states have the most slaves? So just don't write 1, write 2 or 3. Where are most of the slaves in their states? Again, write the counties or the area that it gives. Geographic features, if they're near the oceans, mountains, rivers. So in Kentucky, let's see where most of them are. Right up here near the top, right? So this will be our Ohio River. So we can put near the river. And right here in Henderson, Kentucky, right here next to a border, next to the Ohio River. Where did slavery grow? This is where we're going to use our other source, this one. So we had where did slavery grow from the previous year? We're looking 1810 and 1790. So let's go 1710 or 1810, and we can judge 1810 free, non-white. Let's go to the slaves. See where this slave population grew from this slave population, 1790. So let's look at Connecticut. We know that Connecticut's in the north. Make an inference to see, before you look at these numbers, would a northern state jump in slavery numbers? And then we can test it. 1790 slave for Connecticut, 2,600. In 1810, only 310. So we wouldn't list that on there. Let's go to Delaware. Again, a northern state. 8,900 and 1790. Jump to 1810 slave, nearly cut in half. So we wouldn't list that on there. Now Georgia, it's a southern state, and we saw it grow. Remember, you can cross-reference these sources to fill out your formative performance task. 1790, 29,000, 1810. Almost tripled, even quadrupled, 105,000. So Georgia would be listed as a state. Where did slavery grow? So Georgia, there's one. Let's keep working through it, see if we can find some more. Maryland. We have 1790, 103,000 slaves. In 1810, jumped slightly to 111. Remember, Maryland is right above Virginia, so that would explain the influx of most of those slaves. So we could say slavery grew there from 1810 to 1790. Massachusetts, we didn't have a population for either of those, slave population, so we wouldn't write anything. Let's go down to Virginia. These numbers were kind of mixed together, but we have 1790 slaves, 292,000. In 1810, 392,000, a jump of 100,000. So we can list Virginia on that. So make sure we pay attention to our years. When it says where did it grow from the previous year, don't look at 1809, but look at 1790, and vice versa for 1830, look at 1810, 1850 to 1830. See where the slave populations grew, okay? And again, you can use any of these sources. The 1860, this is just really a good section to look at to see where the slave populations grew as we're getting to the Civil War. And that's really the point of this lesson, is to show you how these different sentiments and feelings divided our country, and slavery is what eventually led to the Civil War. We see that, let's go to, this is a really good one. You can get most of your information on this because it gives you the actual numbers. But in the other one, it gives you your state numbers. So in 1860, look at the Deep South compared to the North. No slaves, all the way up here. We're all free, right? We see a few out west, a lot in Texas. We're seeing a lot in the right part of Texas. So the Deep South really forms by 1860, and this is where we're going to see our states start to separate from the Union. The Union, of course, was the North. And at this time when Abraham Lincoln was getting elected, we really have a divide. We really see a mix between the North, the free, and the South, the slaves. So use all these sources to help you answer these questions. and to answer your formative performance task. But there's another part on your formative performance task. So the task specifically is a graphic organizer. You can download this, type it in on Google. There'll be a place for you to submit it on Google. But then you have a second part here. And don't complete this in one day. Complete a little bit. This isn't due until the 20th of April, maybe next Friday, maybe May 1st. So take your time on this. Make sure you get some good information on this. So we have clicking or hovering your mouse over the counties of your state. So this is where we're specifically looking in Kentucky. So your state, most of us probably live in Rowan County, and Rowan County didn't form till after Kentucky had been a state for a few years. So make sure that we can find that. That's really where this map comes in at. This is what I want you to use to answer these questions. So use 1860 to answer these questions. What counties have the most slaves in Kentucky? This part is Kentucky. See the dark parts of Kentucky. You can also use this one as well to see the dark parts of Kentucky. Which counties have the most slaves? You can just list those. Where are there the least? You can cross and corroborate both of these sources. And if you zoom in enough, it'll show you the per capita slave population. So we see Jackson County, 0.2% of their population was slaves. But in Woodford County, 52.5%. So use those numbers, see where the slaves are the most at. Again, just list a couple. You don't have to list 60 and 60 or 120 counties in this. Just see which parts have the most. So the bottom right of the screen, choose to show the enslaved population. I believe that this is right on this part. So you can actually move this and it'll change what the maps look like. We have free African Americans. These are free. Where do we see most of these at in 1860? Not really in the South. They escaped to the free North. Remember, they crossed the River Jordan to the free North. But in this question, it says go to the enslaved population, which is what we were looking at. So we see our South, obviously none in the North in 1860. Where are the slaves the majority of the population? So the majority of the population, just see, enslaved population, go to a dark right. Slaves, 10,000 in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That makes up 43%, nearly 44% of the total population. So whenever you see a lot of slave populations making up most of the state, on this one we're just looking at Kentucky. So on the second part, just look at Kentucky. This part you can look at the whole map. These questions just look at Kentucky. On the bottom right, so click enslaved, where slaves the majority of the population. So historians often refer to the Cotton Belt. So we talked about the cotton gin and Eli Whitney. A few of you had that for your inventor during your Industrial Revolution projects. So that you should be an expert on this. So the Cotton Belt, why do you think we call it the Cotton Belt? A lot of cotton production, obviously, which was an area of the United States where cotton was grown. This area had a high number of slaves due to these plantations. They needed these slaves to run the plantations. Based on these maps, where do you think this was? Cross-reference this and this to see where most of the slaves were. And then it has a few follow-up. Why do you think slave populations grew? And why did they grow more in some parts than in the others? So really comparing the North to the South. And just a refresher, all of this will be posted on Google Classroom. It's just a supplementary activity for us to do. In the meantime, leading up to the Civil War, we're working on packets right now dealing specifically with talking about the Civil War and teaching the Civil War. So I'll try to post another video kind of like this, just giving a supplement. I know not everybody has access to this video. So this is not a assignment that'll be for everybody. This is specifically Google Classroom for those students. So any questions that you have, just go ahead and post it. You all have been doing a great job of submitting your assignments. Keep the good work up. Any questions or anything comes up, contact myself, Mr. Robinson. If you have Miss Hood, contact her. And yeah, thank you all for watching this. And I hope that you are kind of putting the pieces together about how we're leading up to the Civil War. Go Vikings.